evening, all of our Facebook audience. Welcome to Light the Fire. This is a series that we're doing on behalf of Stalo government, and we would like to open up, as we do at any other gathering and coming together of our people, with a prayer. We're going to ask Hulihuatul Grand Chief Stephen Point to open us up in a good way, and please say the prayer to get us going for this evening.
Okay. Grandfather, we give you thanks for this day. We give you thanks for our evening tonight. We ask for your blessing and your presence with us as we discuss our matters of great importance to our folks at home, our people. Grandfather, we ask you for special thought and prayer for those who might still be ill at home or have loved ones in the hospital or maybe grieving for dear ones that have lost. Grandfather, we ask for a special blessing on all our leadership today and help them in the daily work that they have for our people. Oh, Grandfather. Oh.
Asai. I'd like to welcome everybody to this special conversation that we're going to have this evening. Again, this is sponsored by Stalo government. Our hope is that these chats with Light the Fire will go out to our community members as we continue to implement our inherent right to self-determination and self-government. Since this event is streaming live and on our public Facebook page, please don't hesitate to let your friends and family know they're welcome to watch. It will also be posted on our SXG YouTube channel afterwards, so people can see it at their leisure. My name is Alia, and I'd like to introduce you briefly to the organization SXG. I work with Stalo government, formerly known as SXTA, Stalo Treaty Association. Our communities are Achilitz, Lacamel, Skelkale, Chiactal, Yakuquias, and of course, Skaluk. Tonight, our host, Hulihuatul Grand Chief Stephen Point, will speak with our honored guest, Chief Alice Thompson, about her long service as chief of her community and her involvement in the SXG. Before we get started, I'm going to read a little bit about the history of their work in our Stalo communities. Hulihuatul, who is SXG's in-house legal advisor and the Chancellor of the University of British Columbia and a former Lieutenant Governor of British Columbia. Grand Chief Point practiced law and sat on the provincial court bench for many years. He's also a member of the Skelkale First Nation and served as chief for 15 years between 75 and 99. From 1994 to 1999, he served as tribal chair of the Stalo Nation. During that time, the Stalo Nation entered the BC Treaty process. Chief Alice Thompson has been the elected leader of Lacamel since the year 2000. She's also the secretary of the SXG's board of directors and has had a long career in corrections as well. In recent years, she's been focusing on specific land claims, citizenship, constitution, and human resources for her community. My role in these conversations is to start things off with a question or two, and then let the conversation roll from there. At the 40-minute mark, my apologies, after 40 minutes, we'll leave time for audience members to ask questions. These can be posted in the Facebook Live or emailed to outreach@sxgov.ca. So with all of the formalities out of the way, I'd like to get started and have a conversation with the two of you about your work with Stalo government, a little bit about self-governance and what you might be doing specifically in your community, Chief Thompson. So if you could please introduce yourself to the people that are online with us and maybe fill in any details that I missed with the introduction.
Okay, great. Ace Whale, good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me on this evening's session. My traditional name is Mecha. My English name is Alice Thompson, and as shared, I have been the elected leader on council for Lacamel First Nation since the year 2000. I am a mother and a grandmother and a very proud full woman. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. So you've been in community leadership for many years. We look back in 2000, we're coming up on almost a 25-year mark for in working in leadership and working for community. How has the role evolved for you? And for that matter, how have you changed over the course that you've been in leadership?
Yes. Yes, I've been very fortunate to have worked with some very strong leaders and council during my time working for the community, even before being elected into leadership. I've watched these leaders and council members struggle, and I've seen the challenges as well. And that really laid the foundation for the work that I would pick up when I became elected into leadership in the year 2000. And if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't have had that strong guidance, I guess, to help me to set me on that path that I knew that our community had wanted to be on. There's a couple of important tasks that I had set out to do when I first got elected. And the first one was unity. It was very important for our community to become unified in order to be able to make those very important decisions that we need to make. And also the second part was to give voice to our community, to give that empowering encouragement to our community members. Too often, like back in the day, communities would just say, just make a decision. That's what we elected you for. They would just lay it in the hands of their chief and council to make the decision on their behalf. So we really needed to reshape the thinking of community members that, yes, your voice is very important and we cannot succeed at anything unless we have your voice, your guidance, and your support behind that. So unity, that was very much a challenge. We were coming through a time of being fractured, quite a difference in age categories that we had as well. Coming from a matriarchal system, and then I've seen many councils change over during my time as well, seeing going from matriarch to patriarch, matriarch to patriarch, and all the struggles that were in between there. So again, working on ensuring that unity was there and empowering the people to step out of that darkness and come into the fold to start making decisions that they in the end would be able to support. As for how it would change me, being a very young leader at the time, and a single mother, I was one of those ones, and this is probably typical, is that, we're going to set out to change the world right away. We're going to do this, we're going to do that. Well, I soon quickly learned that that's now not how things happen. We come together, and unless you have the people behind you driving the work that needs to get done, you will not succeed. And that's always been my belief. So I've learned to become very patient. I've learned to listen, not just with my ears, but with my heart as well. And learning to be compassionate and ensuring that any decision that is made is looking forward and not having any impact on any of the lives of my community members.
Yeah, you bring up a really, really good point. And I love what you said about listening with your heart and not just thinking of this as a job. And I think maybe that's the difference for our communities, is we are invested by our own blood of what happens in our community. Our children are going to live on this land. They're going to take over the resources that we pass on to them. And that's very real for us as Indigenous people, as connected as we are. The other point is that sometimes community members do feel complacent. I felt that way before. I wish that leaders would just go ahead with this decision. I wish things would be quicker. I wish thinking that things can happen a lot quicker or easier than in reality they're able to. and consultation, you know, we're getting consulted so much. And so you kind of have to try to really balance between those two sides, I think, where people just want things done, but they want to be heard at the same time. And how do you make everybody happy? Well, that's obviously impossible. And I've learned that coming from a very political family. It's not possible to make every single person happy, but you can do your best.
Yeah.
And resiliency, being a woman in leadership, I think is something that you have to toe in large amounts for all the challenges that you face, especially like I did not know that you were a single mom, you know, doing all of this work and how difficult that must be. Did mentors ever come into play for you? And if you had that mentorship, then how did that affect the work that you were doing? And do you mentor anybody? Are you currently mentoring any young people in your community?
Okay, I'll start with the first piece regarding if I had any mentors. Well, there were a number of leaders and members of chief and council that I watched and I listened. Not that they like physically or outright said, I'm going to take you under my wing and I will show you this, that. I watched them because that's how, you know, I've been told that's the best way to learn, is just to sit and watch and listen. So the ones that I really looked up to and helped shape who I am today, first of all, was my mother, Liz, who was chief for many years and also served on council. She came into a time in the 70s of trying to make it in a place where it was male dominant. It was a lot of struggles for them at that time, and we had an all-female council in 74, I believe it was. So having to, and she was a small lady as well, like she was, I mean, she was like 5 feet tall. And having a small lady, but she had a very big voice. So she used it as often as she could. Probably came from her being the baby of the family. So she had to, you know, be loud and boisterous and just to be able to get her point across. So she was the first one, is, you know, have your voice. The second one was Susie Lewis, my aunt, and she was on council alongside with my mother, and they were sisters. They had disagreements as well too, which is also healthy, but she was also the band manager. She was very hardworking. She was driven. She had a very strong work ethic, and I do believe that that's where I got my drive from as well too, is watching her be there all the time, night and day, many hard, long hours of the day. She did eventually bring me into the fold to say, I'm going to show you how this is done, because in 1 year from now, I'm going to resign from being the band manager. And that's in 1996 is when I became the band manager for my community. The next one was the late George Campo, who was who moved to the community, and I saw him struggle as well too, because we had some very strong matriarchs on council in the community who are very vocal, and I saw him be challenged with that a lot of times, but he stood tall and he stood strong, and he brought a lot of that male component into our administration at the time when it used to be just all women running the show, right? And the next one was Susan McCamey, who was on council just before I came on. And I watched her as she brought her education and her knowledge to the table as well, too. And I really appreciated what happened there. But with each of them, I saw the struggles that they all went through. Like I said before, the women chiefs trying to be taken seriously at the table in a male dominant or political environment. And then I saw, of course, the man who was challenged along the way by the matriarchs, but in the end, I do believe he became stronger for that as well, too, understanding that that we are matriarchal. So each of them all laying that path for me to pick up parts of what they like to see to make our community better. It helped me and my councils, and I've been on a number of councils. Councils came and went, and it was their vision that we fought and strived for to make real for our ancestors, and that's what I still hold true and dear to my heart today as well.
Mm.
Mm.
That's amazing that you can kind of look back on your path and think specifically, oh, I remember, you know, this person, my aunt, or, you know, all the different people that you had touched upon who influenced
Mhm.
your path and probably how you're doing your work today. How important do you think it is for mentorship in general to happen, and how might you be involved in that now?
Well, mentorship, I do believe, is very important. Our community at this point in time are 650 plus members. We've had quite an influx of applications for membership, and the majority of those are young people. So when I look at myself now, and I heard this at a couple of elders events that I've been at recently, is we are now the generation of elders, and I'm thinking, oh no, now I better step it up. But I haven't actually named a mentor or brought somebody in to start mentoring them in how I do business. I just hope that, you know, out of all of the young people that I have in our community, that they are watching, and they always say that the eyes of the people are upon you. And I really, really believe in that. And it's always, you know, be careful how you speak, be careful about your actions, make sure that what you do and what you decide is for the better, for the people, and it's not for myself.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember when I was doing youth work and being mentored in a lot of different ways, especially politically, uh, you know, by some of the activists in the city. They had talked about that youth were, at that point, had made up 50% of the population, all people under the age of 30 years old. And I don't know what the statistics are now, but I definitely feel like our communities are booming. Our youth are taking the culture basically by the horns and running with it. They're the ones who want to do the coastal jams, you know, they're the ones that want to do canoe journey. They're the ones that are dragging us to powwows and to, you know, to the canoe races now, and looking forward to winter. They're just thinking about, oh, okay, now I have to get prepared, talking about winter already, and summer's not even over yet. So I see that inspiration and that light and that boom in them, and it is very, very exciting. So I have no doubt that there are so many young people in your community who are capable and willing. Just for those that might be online who maybe don't exactly know, you did talk a little bit about the population for Lacamo, but what about your land base? So like just we have about 30 people online with us right now. Maybe people might be interested if they don't know, like, where is your actual physical land base of your territory?
Okay, so we're not talking about reserves, are we? Or are we talking about reserves?
That's an excellent question. I feel like that question could spark a whole
Oh, yes. Yeah.
few hours if we went down that pathway. Let's just talk about the reserve lines for what Lacamo is right now.
Okay, so we've actually been downsized to just a minuscule amount of what we used to be, and we're just under 1,200 acres, and I'll use that old term, acres. We have property that is the majority of the property are on 3 reserves right now that are residential, and that's Halacton, Lacamo, and Squiam. We have a few other pieces across the river around Old Orchard Road and the industrial area around Old Orchard Road as well. We also have an island that is slowly being washed away, which, yes, it'll be another specific claim. But really, out of all the the reserves that we have, including the shared ones, 3 of them are inhabited.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so what is the history, just going off curiosity at this point, for how it was reduced so much?
Oh, that's a whole nother segment, I think, but um, um, I know
The
this is
short version, the really short, I don't know.
yeah, this is I know we're going to be talking about specific claims and that, but really our territory goes to the headwaters of the Norrish Creek across to where Old Orchard is. It bounds along the Vedder and Sumas Mountain and over to Dudney on the west, and to the east it would be bordering on the Harrison Knob up to where it trajects up again to the headwaters of the Norrish Creek. We do have a number of specific claims that we have, 3 major ones, one which we just have received an offer on, and probably what's contributed to the influx of community member applications at this time. We have also 2 large ones, which will encompass which is called Nakaman and the Lower Sumas reserve reductions, which happened in the mid to late 1800s, and that reduced us down to the reserves that we are now. So if you were envisioning driving through Dudney all the way through to Lake Garrock, that would be basically be the Camel territory on the highway side.
Yeah.
And then bounded by the Fraser River and then the mountains to our north.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's so huge if you think about it. That is such a huge land base
It is.
that you have. But then you also said that just 2 of the land bases are inhabited with community members.
3 of them. It would be Squeom, which is where our gas station is. And then there's Halacton, which is where our basically, I'll say where our administration office is, and Lackahammon, which is like the core of Desroches.
Mhm.
Yes.
Awesome.
Mhm.
Speaking of land claims, which you touched on briefly, you're involved in some very specific land claims for your community.
Yeah.
Is there anything you can share about the work that's happening right now and how important it is for you?
Yes. Well, the specific claims work began many years before I became elected to council. In fact, it was the hard work of my predecessors, even before they launched a claim to be considered. So basically, the council that's elected at this point in time are really carrying forward the work that past councils and past leaders have put forward for us to carry on with. We have our first offer is coming up, and we're preparing to have our first meeting, our information session, and a vote in the month of August. And it deals with the Clatwis, which was a reserve that it was at the base of the Norrish Creek watershed. And I identified earlier that the other 2 larger claims, which will have to be taken to the next level because they've surpassed that threshold of what the value or appraised value would be. And that would be the Lower Sumas and the Nakaman specific claim, the reserve reduction. Yeah.
So some of this for me, and I have a bit of an understanding around land claims and some of the legal stuff, but some of it gets lost in translation for me. When we're talking about land claims specifically, I'm just wondering if Grand Chief can chime in here and clarify what does that exactly mean? Just simplify it for people who are joining in with us.
Okay, so under the old federal policy, when the Niska case was won in 1973, essentially, we say it's won, even though it was a split decision. The Niskas were claiming ownership to their entire traditional territory prior to the arrival of Europeans. And so that's what was called the general claim. So the government was supposed to come in to British Columbia, the federal government, and to buy the land from the Indians, generally, all of their traditional territory, from this mountain peak to that mountain peak, from this river to this, the entire territory. And then they were going to open it up for white settlement. Instead, what they did, they stopped writing treaties in 1853 and just began setting out reserves. The problem that happened after that, of course, is that as a reserve were being promised by Governor Douglas and then set out by O'Reilly, the Reserve Commission, then the white settlers began to agitate, saying the Indians have too much land, the reserve land was too big. We're being too generous. So they would go and reduce the reserves even and make them smaller and sell the land to the settlers without the Indian consent, thereby giving rise to what's called specific claims, specific to the reserves once they were established. So the general claim is different. It's the entire traditional territory before Europeans arrived, and the specific claims are those claims that arise once the reserve is actually established. So there are different kinds of claims. I think the federal government has a cap now on the amount of compensation that it can give for any specific claim. That's $150 million, I think. And so that's why McCandless is looking at dividing their claims, because they begin to grow larger than what the cap is. Okay. So it's long and tedious work. It takes a long time to get through the specific claims process. And you have to borrow money actually to get into that process. Once you're in, and then you hire legal counsel, and it's very complicated.
So I heard you talk about the traditional territory, which gets tough because even from how you broke it down for us, Chief Thompson, that was quite a range of territory that you're talking about, traditional territory. And of course, from what I've learned, many of our family groups, traditional territories, hunting lands, trapping lands, fishing spots, overlapped. It wasn't clean and cut like the borders we see now for our reserves even. So I imagine trying to sit down with even 6 different leaders like we have now and go over these maps and these territories and try to clean all of this up and iron it out is many meetings that you've had and are continuing to have, but you're seeing that traction now in your community, which is amazing, that in your lifetime you're able to see the fruits of your labor. And I know here in Scokill we also have a vote that we're doing, and as a community member sometimes I don't know what it is till I get there. It's so hard to keep up with. And so, you know, we appreciate all of the hard work that you do and all the time that's going in the back end of these deals and these things happening, which to me as somebody who does not work directly in the front lines for leadership is updates. I'm just getting updated when I go to a meeting to do a vote or understand that we're expanding our territories. This question could go out to either or both of you. How much of our territory would you say, maybe this might not be the best way to answer it. I don't want it to be too large of a question, but in terms of getting our territory back, let's go at it that way. In terms of acquiring some of what we lost in the reserve reduction, is this the best pathway for us to achieve that? And maybe even just a percentage wise, how much more territory could we acquire through these processes that you're both involved in? I know I ask the real thinkers, and not that the numbers matter as much as just to give people an idea of what are we talking about when we're talking about, you know, acquiring land back.
In the specific claims process, they're always asking for a specific amount because there would have been land surveyed. So they always know that there's 30 acres here or 50 acres there. It's clearly identified what they're asking for returned or compensation for the loss of that land. Mm-hmm. In the general claim, it's always much more complicated. I think the Nisga'a traditional territory, if I remember correctly, it was something like 1/10 of their territory was returned to them in the treaty. And in the Stalo claim that we're dealing with right now, it's much less than that. The difference, of course, is that we've got a couple of million people living, Europeans living in our territory. The northern areas are much less populated. So we've got a lot more going on here in the lower mainland. And there's still a lot of crown land, but the province has been laboring under policy. I don't know if they still are, but the last I heard from when Mike Harcourt was the premier, that they were interested in only returning 5% to the tribes. And so under the current treaty process, we've got just over 10,000 hectares promised in the treaty. And when we look at that, it doesn't seem like a heck of a lot. It's got a high value and a lot of use, certainly more than what we've got currently under the reserve system. But that's a good question. Is it enough to sustain us over the next 100 years? That's a question that probably the next generation is going to have to answer.
I have to agree. That's a question that the next generation are going to have to tackle. And I really do hope that our young people are listening and they are paying attention and will make those decisions when it's time. And as for whether this is the process for us, for now it is. Aside from going down the path of major court cases and things like that, we're looking to set our people on a path now with a potential compensation that's going to help us to potentially buy up some lands, and invest in our community, invest in our economic development, and grow our community in that fashion. Because I know that, a lot of the area that I talked about is agricultural and residential, and the growth, the population growth heading out our way. The cost of land is going to go skyrocketing. And in fact, it's, I see it now, even in just rentals, right? I just want to touch on a couple of other interesting but smaller cases that we have, and that has to do with CPR and the Lougheed Highway. It used to be called Dewdney Trunk Road. These are going to be interesting pieces because the Lougheed Highway, or the old Dewdney Trunk Road, cut through our Squeom Reserve, which is down by the gas station, and as you turn on the bend and coming up to our transfer station, and it goes through the Droche Bridge, over the Droche train tracks, and then again up in this area here at Halacton through. It basically split our reserve. So at three very key points on the Lougheed Highway, we don't want to become all riled up and start throwing up roadblocks or anything, but we are in a very strong position here with government in those claims, and they kind of speak to as well to that recognition that that we deserve to have. Because our community isn't small. We may be small in size in acreage, but our community, if all of our members wanted to return home, we wouldn't have enough land to put them on. We wouldn't have the infrastructure to service them. So we have some interesting times ahead of us, and our next two larger claims, we've been told that those will be moving along fairly quickly in the next 2 years. So the four road claims for the Lougheed Highway and the CPR, those are going to be some interesting times for our community as well too. And I can't wait to share updated information on that as we work next week to do a meeting with Canada to review a new Fraser Valley appraisal report that's just come out. So,
oh wow, that is really interesting. There is a question coming from one of our virtual audience members, and I always like to get onto these right away because at the end we tend to lose track of time. No, we don't lose track of time, but we just start getting so much engagement from the audience as the conversation ramps up. So it's probably best to get to this question and then we can keep the conversation moving. So this question comes from Dan Kelly, who's a LCAML member. And we did touch on the answer, but maybe we can just be very specific. How do you feel treaty would benefit LCAML and the 5 other Stalo communities? Again, I feel like you've been talking a lot about land acquisition. Maybe there's some other points you want to make. So again, how do you feel treaty would benefit LCAML and 5 other Stalo communities? And it's a 2-parter. How can we move treaty forward with LCAML community to the final stage and implementation? So one of your own members engaging with us online.
Okay, great. Okay, so LCAML's been in the process for quite a number of years. Our community members know how long and how we've taken a hiatus and we came back. There was that shift in you know, our approaches to it, and versus getting into stage 5, we did the MOU signing. I believe it was 18 now. Was it 18, October of 18?
Yeah.
But our community has always shared that we stay in the process. It's like a parallel to what we're doing in our community now. It's like I'd like to see us as being self-governing right now, because we are doing that work. We just don't have an agreement in place. We've been doing our own leases long before Indian Affairs would even approve them. We'd buck sheen leases, we'd make money for our community. As we're trying to work through a process to gain more traction on the lands that we're trying to gain, or some of the compensation that we're trying to gain, we're also trying to gain that that affirmation that yes, you are self-governing. We want that. I want to hear that we are self-governing. I've always felt that we are. We've demonstrated that we can govern ourselves, and our land code and you know, administering our own education, our development corporation, we are building on that. So for now, staying in treaty and ensuring that you know, the work that's laid out there, and you know, putting those markers or those push pins in these different areas to really affirm and set out where each of our communities are, and because that really ties us to the history, the language, our connection to our ancestors, to our traditional names. Sorry, Grand Chief, was there something that you wanted to add to that?
Yes, well, I think when it comes to benefits, why is a treaty important? Well, when we first made contact with Europeans, of course, they assumed that we were inferior, that we didn't have laws, that we didn't have any kind of government. And they instituted the Indian Act to protect Indians from unscrupulous white people. They thought that we needed protection because we didn't understand government, that we weren't educated in what they called civilized governance. And we were to be wards of the government until such time as we could begin to look after ourselves. Well, 150 years later, we're still under the Indian Act. The Indian Act is really, really old legislation designed for a dying people. They didn't really think Indians were going to survive after 1921, given the diseases that we made contact with. And for all intents and purposes, when you did the math, we were dying at a huge rate, and they didn't expect us to survive, but we did survive. Mm-hmm. And now we've got to the place where 50% of our population is under the age of 25. A lot of our young people are getting educated, getting to school. Mm-hmm. They feel restless about still being under the Indian Act, mm-hmm. and we should be governing ourselves. Right now, under the Indian Act, we govern our reserves, and they're very, very tiny fractions of our traditional territory. with the federal government now recognizing that we have the rights to self-government protected under the Constitution. Under the treaty process, we have now the opportunity of expanding our jurisdiction, not just in our reserves, but also taking on certain jurisdictions outside of our reserves, inside of our traditional territory. That means that we could also benefit tremendously from the sale of timber, from the discovery of gold and minerals inside our traditional territory, that we should gain a share of those resources. And in some cases, compensation for lost resources over the last millennium. So we're at interesting times, and I know that it's difficult for people to understand because so many bad things have happened to Indigenous people. We don't trust government very much. And some of that lack of trust is even transferred to our own leadership. And I'm here to tell you that we need to have a good discussion about this so that we better understand why we wanted to do it at the beginning and to see what the real benefits are. And there are many. Talking to the initiatives now and talking to the leadership up there, they said that they're in a position economically where they're not as concerned about receiving government funding as they used to be because they're making such tremendous strides economically in their traditional territory outside of the reserves. So the treaty has made a tremendous difference for them. And I think it will for us as well.
That's a really great explanation for something that seems intangible or hard to understand around. These are our reserve lines. We know where Scout starts, where it ends. Same with Lacamel, same with Chiacton. But to think about the shared traditional territory, it's massive. It's huge. And how many millions or maybe even more money has been made off of our resources? Never seen a dime. But we're like, oh no, the purse strings of the government, they're paying for our dental. Like, that's not even the case anymore. I get way more benefits and top ups from Scout Kale as a band member today than I ever did from the status card. And the process to even sometimes get $50 back or something like that is such a headache that half the time I wasn't even doing it. But now I can go to my own administration and say, hey, here's my chiropractor receipts, or I bought this sports equipment for my kid, and I'm getting way more personalized and beneficial service from Scout Kale as an administration now. It goes through through that the programs that they run there and that they administer. But I would rather be taken care of as a band member, as an Indigenous person by my own people, than I would to continually being stuck under the Indian Act as a ward of Canada. And that's the difference, I think, that really has, like, for people in everyday life, that's not up here. And maybe it is becoming more clear. Like, I hope conversations like this, it becomes more clear that it's not about give us money, now we for sure say that we're selling our territory off. It's about we're expanding to the place where we always should have been. And there's a lot, this is just a pathway for us. Like you said, Chief Thompson, we're going towards self-government. We're already doing the things. This is just an added package of benefits where we can share more now and actually have say and sit at that table with government. So I love that you were both able to outline different things and just clarify for people. I think we need to hear it, not 3 different ways or 10 different ways, but sometimes 100. It just to be absolutely sure of what we're talking about here and what's happening at the leadership table. So yeah, I really appreciate both of your responses to that question. The last part around community supporting in getting to the final stage in implementation, is there anything that community members that if you had something, a call out to ask specifically to your members, Chief Thompson, that you would say is going to help move this forward now?
Well, we're at the stage now where we're redefining this agreement that we're looking at. It we used to call treaty, and I know that when our community members hear the word treaty, it's like, their hair stands up and their back goes up, and it's like, okay, if we go there, we're going to lose something, and that's almost like that whole shadow of the Indian Act, right? And I believe we're getting better in that sense where individuals used to be afraid to leave start looking after ourselves, and they said, if we do that, we're going to lose this, that, and the other thing. But we can do it better. Like you said earlier on, I would rather receive services and administration from my own community than from Indian Affairs. You don't have to fight for that $50. You go to the community and you go to your health center or whatever and say, I've got this. And I recall doing those dental claim forms, right? And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this is like, it's like I need a lawyer to help me. I should have came and seen Stephen to help me fill out my claim form, because it was like 10 pages long, and I don't believe I ever did get reimbursed. But the big picture is the Indian Act is so outdated, and it's not serving us any good. What we need to do is to come to supporting what we're already doing, but having that strong structure behind it, those the constitutions of each community, what we're going to do and how we're going to do business, because we're doing the self-government already. We also don't want to be accepting programs or services from outside agencies that are already critically underfunded. We want to make sure that when we do bring them under our fold, that they are fully funded, that they look at growth and population, and not just for what's happening in years 1 to 5 and then reapply again for years 6 to 10. We need to know that what we're doing is going to not only affect what we're doing for our people now, but for generations. It's going to be sustainable.
Yeah, there's an interesting question coming from the audience. I think that ties right into what you're saying around longevity, because we think about the now and okay, my kids and okay, my house and fixing my roof or whatever, like that's so in the moment. And I know it's hard for people to continually work together, and we've had fractures in leadership before and all those kinds of things, just to give context. But Betty Paul asks, how is the agreement with the Chilliwack bands beneficial for us in the Camel?
Well, well, maybe I'll let Stephen respond to this one, and then I'll add on to it.
Okay, sounds good.
I'm not sure what they're talking about in terms of the agreement with the Chilliwack bands.
So I think if I can frame this right, maybe if you're listening, Betty, you could offer clarification, but how does the Camel benefit from being in this agreement with Chiacton, with Skokale, with, what are the mutual benefits of, why wouldn't the Camel just go it alone? I think is probably another way to phrase it, but I don't want to,
I understand now that, well, this is one of the reasons that we've embarked upon self-government as a collective, is all proposing all 24 bands joined together. Because there are some issues that are quite large that go beyond just the tribal boundaries. Fishing is one. The Fraser River, of course, runs through, and we all should have equal access and benefit from that resource, but we should also be interested collectively in protecting that resource from things like pipeline intrusion, highway intrusion, or damages. And so it's one of the things that we need to, as a collective Stall Nation, work together. And we have in the past collectively work to protect salmon. The other thing that I think is jointly responsibility of all the tribes is environment. How do we jointly protect and look after from flooding, from fires, from all these other larger intrusions on the environment, such as fresh water. Water is becoming a huge issue these days as we see that the reservoir is getting less and less. Question is there's too much logging happening, and how do we regulate that collectively? So there are a number of issues like justice, which is just too big for any one community or even a tribe to take on its own. We wanted to have our own peacekeeping force, our own court systems that deal with our own internal matters, just as the Lummi Nation has, just as Window Rock, Arizona has their own justice system. Individual First Nations, even tribes, I would argue, are probably too small to have their own justice system. So justice is an issue that collectively we can work together on under one constitution. The other areas are things like child protection. I think Huthneath is a fine example of all of the bands that started working together to protect our children, and that probably should remain as one unit collectively, but in my view, under the direction of the collective leadership. And so this kind of governance where we can work together on the larger issues is critical, I think. On the short term, I hope that First Nations realize that they can stay under the Indian Act for a while if they feel that that's important to do so. But let's begin to work collectively as a larger unit to begin to exercise self-governing rights on these much larger issues.
Chief Thompson?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to add a little bit to that as well, too. That and thank you for identifying those larger global issues that you know, there was strength in numbers behind it. And I agree that you know, our community doesn't want to take on Child and Family Services. We don't want to take on that jurisdiction yet. And there's the fishing issues, the environment. You named quite a few of the ones that are occurring right now. It's important to remind that each community still has their own autonomy under their constitution, and hopefully, you know, that everybody's on their track of concluding their constitution, which identifies, you know, how we work together, our relationship, and what we retain overseeing within our own community. Same as other communities as well too. So I hope I'm not trailing off on that answer.
And no, I can definitely see what you're saying around just the benefits of having more people and working together to serve a larger population. Like the things that you can do is what I'm hearing from both of you around supporting one another, but yet not giving up so much to the collective that you're not able to serve specifically to your people either. And I think that's the beauty of well, for now they're Indian Act bands, but if the village is keeping the same governance structure that they choose, that's been working. So yeah, you specifically serve your people in the Camel all the same, but on a larger scale, you're supported in the work in the areas that affect everybody. To me, what I've heard over the years around collective and unified leadership has been also just being able to go to the government with a larger voice. Like you said, there's skin in the game when we're talking about these major highways that run through your territory. You know, Skelkale has instances of that. Chiacton has different instances of that as well. And when you go together as one voice to the government, well, now they have to kind of sit up and pay attention a little bit more. They're like, oh, now we're talking about this much territory and this many people, not just that one little tiny speck over there with 60 people. That, you know, it's easy for them to dismiss. But when they have more and more First Nations, Indigenous leaders coming to them in a unified way, they have to listen, because those lands, they're invested in those lands. It makes a difference. There's, you know, a bigger pot of money just to service people and I think get Indigenous communities the things that they need. Where, you know, for us, joining in with Atchilets and Yekakuyas, we have a beautiful community building to show for it. We have a daycare in our community now. We have a theater to do community screenings. Like, you know, we've had some of our very firsts of community gatherings in that building. And I'm so proud to see that in my lifetime. So proud. It's so easy to bring my daughter like 2 steps away to daycare, and she's being taken care of by people I know and trust, who are community members. So there's there's a lot to it, I think, in different layers. As a community members, those are just the things I've experienced. We are getting to just the 5-minute mark for our conversation this evening. We did not make it all the way through our planned questions, but that's okay because we're getting a lot of great, feedback and engagement directly from community members. We have another question from Joanne Jefferson, who is a Scout-Kale member, and she would like to know how Treaty is implementing UNDRIP. For those who do not know, UNDRIP stands for United Nations. Oh, can you finish that acronym, please?
United Nations Declaration on the Rights and Recognition of Indigenous People. Yeah.
Thank you. I thought I knew that acronym well. I did not. That is why you're here.
Okay. What's happened internationally is that the international community has passed a declaration finally recognizing that Indigenous people have rights, not only to self-government, but to their land. The United States and Canada dragged their feet for some time because of the treaty arrangements that they have with Indigenous people about signing the United Nations Declaration, but eventually they did. Canada and the United States have signed on, and now we're passing, Canada at least is passing internal legislation, making the international law domestic law, internal to Canada and internal to BC. So what does that mean for treaty? Well, that's a very good question, given that you have some Supreme Court decisions that recognize that we have the right to the land, specifically Chilcotin. And we now have Section 35 of their constitution that recognize that we have existing Aboriginal rights. And we now have the federal government saying, because of UNDRIP, well, we recognize that Indigenous people have the right to self-government as well. And so we're at a time never before in the history of Canada where Indigenous people are front and center on the federal agenda. And God help us if we can somehow capitalize while this government's in place to actually get a formal treaty that does this, because once it's a treaty under Section 35, it can't be amended by subsequent governments. It becomes a constitutional document. So the best protection against erosion of our rights is to have some sort of treaty protected by their constitution. So UNDRIP is being implemented. It's finally recognizing that we have the right to self-government, was something we've said all along. The SXG is beginning to take steps to just begin to act and be government. We're putting on the cloak of government, and we're saying that we are government now, and so we're in a very different time. It's the most exciting time I've ever been, and I've been doing this for now, oh God, over 50 years, I guess. And this is fascinating time for our people. I wanted to mention this one thing, that I know people are afraid that if we take on our own self-government, we're going to lose the federal funding for programs and services, or provincial funding. And the short answer to that is no, that under the treaty, the previous funding for federal and provincial funding services will continue. The big benefit to us is that we get to begin to share in the resources from our various territories, so that we actually see more benefits flowing to us over the year.
Awesome. And just one thought before I forget is, it reminds me of the example of getting services administered through Scout-Kale or through SAY, rather than, like, as a real life example, rather than getting services through the government. Those same funds are going to be flowed through, I think, differently and handled by our own people who understand how to do programs for our people, who understand how to administer money for our people and the programs and the good work that we're already doing. And in places like canoe racing. You know, there was a big fund that was around land-based healing and cultural programming, and they wanted people come apply for this and tell us what you're doing and tell us how long the program is and give us a budget. And, you know, we had one of our Indigenous people go in there and say, look, they're already doing it. They're racing, they're taking care of their youth, they're teaching them culture, they're preventing them from getting into alcohol and drugs. You just need to give the money to the right people who are already doing the work for free. It was like this is a shift. This is a shift that we're seeing and witnessing in our own lifetime. It's like our people do know how to guide and lead us into the next phases of how we're growing as a community, and the government cannot come in and tell us how to do that. I don't care how long they think that they've worked with Indigenous communities for, or what their exposure. If you are not Indigenous and have not lived and grown up in our communities, you cannot come in and try to run a program for our people. It is our own people. When we got our own youth worker at Skokale, it was like, that was when I was getting the text messages. That was when my son started going to youth group and camp, because it was being administered through somebody who knows us. It's just that difference. To me, that's that real life example of the difference that I can feel on the ground as a community member of the work you guys are doing. It is trickling down. It definitely is trickling down. Was there something that you wanted to add? Sorry. Oh, I'm just reading, making sure I'm caught up on the comments that are coming in. We've had around 65 people so far join in on the conversation. A steady 30 people have been online with us throughout the entire time, kind of, people that are coming in and out.
I just wanted to add that at one time with the Indian Affairs bureaucracy, something like 80% of the money that was originally budgeted for benefit of First Nations across Canada, 80% of it was spent by the government itself in the Department of Indian Affairs. So less than 20% actually trickle down to the communities for the benefit of the communities. That's changing. Indian Affairs has closed down a majority of its offices in BC, and we now have First Nations administering these programs themselves. So there has been a tremendous shift over the last 25, 30 years. And that shift has got to continue to what we call self-government.
Mm-hmm. And that comment actually came through from one of our relatives down in the States, George Swanesit, saying, we are already doing it, now help us continue. That's absolutely just good to see that the community does know and is understanding the conversations we're having, right? And they're with us on that. So Chief Thompson, we've already officially run out of time for the conversation. That this always happens. We start to get ramped up and it's like, there's the hour mark, right? But that's what we promise to people, is that we'll be with you for an hour online and we'll try to engage as much as we can. And I really feel like a lot of good information was shared this evening. But is there anything that we missed or that you want to add to top off the conversation this evening that you feel like is really important?
Well, I do want to, and it's just a comment, and it goes back to the time when I was being asked to run for chief, and it comes from the late Frank Malloy Sanchez. He said, "Your community is at a point in time where it's eclipsing now." He goes, "Are you ready to eclipse as well?" He said, "I think your time has come." He said, "But if I can leave you with one thing to really think about as you're serving your community, is to always be mindful of the decisions that you make, that you never harm anyone, and that anything that you do is going to be sustainable and will help make the lives of everyone better." That's all I needed to add. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. I do really thank you both for your service. I've only witnessed how tough leadership can be. I run a small canoe club and that tires me out to no end. So to be managing community members, their lives, working with government, doing budgeting and financing, and for how long the two of you have been working for your people is absolutely tremendous. And not just blowing smoke, like I really do have that gratitude inside myself, because I know how tough the work has been, and that you've taken it so far, and you continue to do good work and do things like this, come online so that we can engage with people in a different way. We are in a different time now with technology, and it's just so great to see our leaders engage and grasp on to things like this, Facebook Live, where people can see and join and hear and listen and engage with us in a different way. I think that that's the time now. If you'd like to add anything, final thoughts as well, Grand Chief, then we are going to wrap up the evening.
Just thanking Chief Thompson for coming on board tonight. Great discussion. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Teresa. Thank you, Elliot.
Yep. Thank you to all of our listeners this evening out there on Facebook. I know that we did have to cancel last week. We're going to be rebooking with Chief Angie Bailey so that we can be with all of you sometime into the fall and having more discussions like this. Light the fire, we sit near the fire, and that is where the truth comes out. That is what our elders teach us, and that is why we gather like this virtually around the fire. So I want to thank all of you for your engagement tonight and your time. Lahai.
All right.